Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 80, the greatest books of all time. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancy Eaton, and this is Pop Goes World. You know, Yancy, we mentioned on a previous show about how much we love to read, and I thought one of the things that would be neat to explore is what some of our favorite books of all time are, and I thought it'd be interesting to hear what a millennial's favorite books are, what a Gen Xer's favorite books are. So if you're listening and you love to read as much as we do, boy, you're going to enjoy this episode, that's for sure. But Yancy, what's going on in your life, my friend?
There's not a lot going on, just a typical work-life balance that I'm constantly struggling to find and often failing miserably. That's just the way things go. I will say this. Okay, so the title of the podcast is like the greatest books of all time.
Yes.
Or I forgot exactly what you said. I know this kind of goes without saying, and yet here I am unnecessarily saying it. I've read maybe 1/1,000,000th of all the books there are to read. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty voracious reader, but obviously, like, there's a lot of things that I haven't read. This is more so like books that have stuck with me, like through through time, or the books that I've come back to are really changed my worldview a lot. Not necessarily like the most entertaining, or not necessarily the best written books, but for me personally, the books that I got the most out of. And I kind of wanted to like just throw that out there that, yes, I understand that like Pride and Prejudice or something is like very good. And I understand that War and Peace is very, very good. But, like I said, this kind of goes without saying. Everybody does their own thing. We have our own thing. We have some of the most like off-Eric book, or not even book, but just taste in general. But I still wanted to say it like, this is a me thing. This is a Chris thing. So you guys can, and just hopefully you find something that is kind of new to you.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to take the same approach as you are. I wanted to go with books that just have stuck with me over the years. The only problem is I think they're all kind of chalky. So I'm probably going to get accused of, doing the textbook answers on this show. But these are books that, I don't know, they've stuck with me over time. And I think they've stuck with a lot of people for good reason, because they're really, really good books, right? Before we get started, though, into our books, I did want to mention, one thing we like doing around here, Yancy, is we like making friends. As you know, we like making lots of friends. And I made some new friends recently, and I wanted to give them a shout out. So there's this podcast, and it's called the Gen X Grown Up Podcast. And these guys, I'm telling you, it's kind of similar to what we do here. It's these three longtime friends. There's John, Mo, and George. And what they do is they look at, like me, like us, like they look at, media and games and like tech, toys, comics, pop culture. But what they do is they look at all this stuff, both from their childhood and also from today, through the eyes of Gen Xers. All three of them are Gen Xers. So they'll look at stuff from the past, they'll look at stuff today. So whereas I've got you to balance me off here as the millennial, they're just three Gen Xers looking at all this stuff. New movies, old stuff. And every other week they do what they call a backtrack show. And they pick like a single topic from their childhood, like Schoolhouse Rock. Do you know what Schoolhouse Rock is, Yancy?
Of course. I'm just a Bill.
Okay, very good. Very good. And they'll do things like they'll pick like movie rental stores. I think you're still old enough to have rented movies at the movie rental store, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So they'll do stuff like that, talk about the Walkman or TV Guide or thing. They do a new show every Thursday, but I just want to give them a shout out because I made friends with those guys, and they've got a really good pod. I really like it. So it's the Gen X Grown Up Pod. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And they also have a YouTube channel as well, where they have lots of Gen X inspired stuff. So that really, hits home for me. I like those guys.
So let me ask you this question though. So they're Gen Xers, and they
Gen Xers.
Talk about pop culture.
Yep.
So basically what you're saying, like, these guys ripped off our podcast.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. No, but they're obviously
I'm joking.
Yeah,
obviously,
I know.
We don't own the right to talk about pop culture exclusively. Like, that's, everybody do what you want to do. If you guys want to start your own podcast, let me know. Get at me and Chris. We'll listen to it. If it's good, hey, we'll even promote on here too. There's always more room for another podcast.
Yeah, I think the difference is that they're actually really, really, really good. And
okay, so that's where the comparisons stop then.
Exactly. They leave us in the dust when it comes to quality, no question. Anyway, are you ready to get started? And another thing I wanted to mention before I do. Speaking of Gen X, this just came to my mind. Yeah, as speaking of Gen X pop culture, I try to infuse as much Gen X pop culture into not just you, Yancy, but also into my two young boys. Because my sons are aged 9 and 5. And my 5-year-old even says, 9 to 5, Daddy, just like Dolly Parton. I'm not even kidding you. He says that to me.
Very nice.
It's awesome.
Very nice.
Anyway, so I make them watch like Gen X movies and Gen X TV shows and music and all that. So anyway, the other day, my parents come down for a visit. Okay, they came to watch my 5-year-old son play soccer. So they make the drive. It's like a 3-hour drive, and we have a really nice visit. And then we all get in the van and we all head out to the soccer field to watch my youngest son play soccer for the night. And so anyway, we set up all our chairs on the sidelines. There's like dozens and dozens of people there, like other kids and coaches and parents and grandparents, including my parents, right? And so out on the field, there's all the kids they're playing. And there's my son, Sean. And he's running around playing soccer. And in the middle of the game, I kid you not, Yancy, middle of the game, it's kind of a quiet point of the game. So everybody on the field can hear it. My son belts out, ba, 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 I want to be sedated. Right in the middle of the field, he starts singing the Ramones. I'm not sure what to think. Like, I'm happy he's been infused with the love of Gen X, the staple from Gen X, the Ramones. It's great. But I don't know if I'm like utterly embarrassed that he's out there singing a song about wanting to be sedated. The other parents are laughing. I don't know what to think.
Chris,
Yancy, help me out.
I love the fact that you do. Obviously, you spend a ton of time with your kids, and like you're deeply involved in their interests, and you guys spend a lot of time together, and it's awesome. Like in all seriousness, you're like dad of the year. Like your kids always come first. They always do. We talk about them all the time, and I love that. I'm not taking anything away from that. I am a little concerned though, like when these kids like get into like high school or something,
I know.
And there's just like this huge gap in like what they know about. You know what I mean?
I know.
Like when they get a little bit older and they realize like I don't know what any of my peers are talking about. I don't watch those movies. I don't listen to that music. Like there's going to be a reckoning at some point. Hopefully it comes a little bit sooner than later, but they're definitely in for a culture shock.
Oh boy, I tell you. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? You and I have never been in the same room together. We've never physically met.
Nope. My wife, she has very little interest in going to Canada.
That's my goal, is to get you up to Canada at some point.
Chris and I will be hanging out in, downtown Toronto.
The millennial generation, is so much better than my generation.
Come on. And I know this is heresy to a lot of people.
It's 2018, and we literally have to tell people not to eat Tide Pods. Okay, so Yancy, we decided this week we talk about books and our favorite books. We'll do our top 5 format like we normally do. I wanted to mention one thing, though. A couple of years ago, maybe even be about 10 years now, I set out to read as many quote-unquote classic novels as I could because I realized that, at this point in my life, I realized I hadn't read as many of those kind of, mandatory kind of classic books as you're supposed to read throughout your life. Those ones they make you read in like high school and stuff like that. When, or make you read when you're a kid and you don't want to read them. And so you don't read them. You just get the cliff notes, and you fudge the assignment, those kind of books. So I decided there had to be a reason why so many of these books are considered classics. So what I did was I actually crafted a list and I set out to read them all. And you know what, Yancy? It was probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life from an arts perspective in my life. It was phenomenal. I realized how many classic novels that are out there that I never read. And I was so glad that I did that. Unfortunately, I'm going to be drawing from that list a lot tonight because it is a little bit chalky, my list. But before we get started, I also wanted to mention that there are some... That process was interesting for a couple of reasons. Like I say, number one, it introduced me to some literature that just is so good. And we'll get into it tonight. But I also realized that there are some really highly praised books that I actually didn't like. And I'll give you a couple of titles and you just tell me what you think. Okay. So this one might surprise some people, but The Great Gatsby is considered, one of the top 5 novels of all time, one of the top American novels of all time. And I did not like it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the story. I didn't like it. Another one is Heart of Darkness. And I know like it's like this great literary classic and they basically, based Apocalypse Now on that book. I didn't like it. I couldn't even get through it. I probably got through a couple chapters and I said, I'm done. And the other one that I think surprises people is Catch-22. Joseph Heller's Catch-22. Everybody loves the book. I hated it.
You know what? As soon as you said that, I thought you were going to say Catcher in the Rye, which is one of my go-to worst of all time American quote-unquote classic novels. I despised The Catcher in the Rye. There was not a single part of it that I enjoyed at all. Yeah.
Oh, man, because I was going to say I have some honorable mentions before we get into our list, and that is definitely one of my honorable mentions. I thought The Catcher in the Rye was great. Oh, see, I really liked it. I liked it. A couple other honorable mentions before we get into the list. Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment is one of the most interesting books I ever read because it basically, you get through this whole novel and you realize, really, nothing really happens. Like this whole book, like nothing actually happens in this book other than there's a murder and then nothing else happens the rest of the book. And, but it's still intriguing. Like it's just engrossing. All Quiet on the Western Front is another book that just sucked me in. Of course, because they made it into a great movie, Jaws. I thought the novel Jaws was phenomenal. I mean, it's really hard to top the movie, and you know how much I love the movie. But the novel, Peter Benchley's Jaws, is really good. It goes in different directions than the movie does. Animal Farm is a book that I recommended to my wife not that long ago. Like, you have to read this. Another one based on a movie was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That book by Ken Kesey, it is outstanding. You saw the movie. Remember when we watched it for the podcast? The book, though, is told right from the beginning from the point of view of Chief Bromden. So you know right away that he's not, mute the way he kind of plays along, right? And then another one I mention is, this is going to sound crazy, because you think of it as a kid's book, but Charlotte's Web. And I don't know what it is about that book. There's something magical. So I always liked it as a kid. And then when my oldest son was probably about maybe 6 years old, I decided I would read that book to him. And just not to get all like, mushy or whatever. I just wanted, but I don't think that you know this about me. But when I was 24, I lost my best friend. My best friend, my whole growing up, my life, at 24, he died suddenly. And I don't know why, but reading Charlotte's Web to my son brought back memories. I don't know why the story about this spider, you know what I mean? But all the themes that are in it made me realize how important friendship is. And so then I realized, man, that book is a lot better than people even think. It's not just a kid's book. It's a book about true, deep friendship, which is amazing. So anyway, I just wanted to mention some honorable mentions. Did you have any honorable mentions you want to throw out before we get to your list, or you save it a bit till later?
I have a few. One of the only times a person has ever gifted me a book in my life. I mentioned Sammy a lot. Sammy's my friend. I love Sammy. He sent me a book called Ishmael, and it's basically about like a talking gorilla, which is it sounds a little far-fetched, but what it equates to is basically like breaking down the types of people in the world. There's you can basically choose to be kind of like a part of the problem or part of the solution, and what you choose as far as your place in the world and how you affect those around you and basically the planet that we live on. It's a very pie in the sky kind of idealistic way of thinking about our place in the world, but it's a really, really powerful book, and I think about it a lot. It almost made my top 5, but I ended up keeping it out. That's one that I definitely wanted to put in there. Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I don't know if you've read it. It won the Pulitzer a few years ago. That's an incredible book. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Rathman. It just basically talks about how bad human beings are at decision making, at extrapolating data, at deciphering huge data sets or graphs, or how we allow our minds to partake in logical fallacies and visual misinterpretations of what we actually see, and why witnesses are such bad pieces of evidence. All these different things that it sounds like it's just a data book, but it's actually so much more, and it really teaches you how to think and how to process information a lot better. I honestly didn't write like a huge honorable mention list, but I'm a huge historical, I love biographies. I love reading about the past. Team of Rivals is it's about Lincoln and about like the cabinet that he put in place, and probably one of the better books I think I've ever read. Snowball by Warren Buffett, or the autobiography about Warren Buffett. That was one of the most interesting books I read last year. I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I think mostly what I enjoy reading the very most is the biographies, the autobiographies. And I just like seeing how people used to live and how they, people who made a big impact in some form or another, whether it be, politics or poetry or pop culture, anything like that. I like seeing, what the effect was, how they got there, their decision-making processes. That's what I spend most of my time on is stuff like that. But like you, Chris, the last couple of years, I've really tried to devote a lot more time in forcing myself to read the classics, especially fiction. I used to always kind of look down on fiction, thinking that it actually took less creativity to write fiction, simply because there's no limitations to what your mind can conjure up. But the more I learn about that, the more I realize that that's actually not true, because anybody can write fiction. That's true. But to write good fiction is actually incredibly, incredibly difficult. So your prose must be that much sharper, and the audience demands so much more, knowing the fact that, you have to make something seem realistic, and you have to paint a picture and create a world where people believe it and want to live in it and actually have some sort of emotional investment in characters. So it's weird. Like the last 2 years, like I've done like this huge shift where I'm reading a lot more fiction. And I think it's, as a whole, I'm a lot more well-rounded, and it does make me appreciate just how talented and just how difficult it is to write fiction. But that was a really long like counter to your questions, but I guess I can go ahead and hop into the list. What do you think?
Before we get into your number 5, I have a question for you then, because you're bringing up an interesting point that I think I'd want to discuss. And that is fiction versus nonfiction, because for me, my top 5 list are all fiction.
Okay.
And now you're making the wheels turn here and making me think about nonfiction. Like, like are there? And I'm trying to think, are there any nonfiction books that would even come close to cracking the top 10? And I can think of 2 off the top of my head. One is All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, and the other is In Cold Blood.
Okay.
And
I haven't read either.
By Truman Capote, and both are unbelievably good. So I would think that they have a chance, but for me, that my top 5 are all fiction. So I mean, I'm interested to see what your list looks like. So why don't we get started? Number 5, your number 5 favorite book of all time is. Go ahead and tell me.
Okay. One last aside, on the last podcast when we actually recommended doing this, and you said, let's do novels. And I'm like, well, let's just do our favorite books, because I do read so much nonfiction. You know what I mean? It's like, it was kind of like self-serving in that respect, but there is a little bit of fiction on here, but not all of it. So number 5 for me is this is probably the chalkiest pick of the 5 that I'm going to give. And I wanted to give some sort of homage to, young Yancy, whenever I was literally reading a book a day, kind of thing. All through elementary school, I was, doing like the accelerated reader programs. I was just so obsessed with reading, 400 or 500 books a year kind of thing. There was one book that I constantly came back to, and I always thought it was interesting, like looking back now, because it's not like this book. It is fiction, but it's not like it was really saying anything from a cultural standpoint. It wasn't pushing some sort of societal agenda. It's not really trying to say anything very big. And I don't really know how well the book is aged. Obviously there's multiple versions of it, but I just always loved it. And I probably read this book 30 times. Like I said, different versions and graphic, overlays on it and special editions and all these things, but it's the Swiss Family Robinson. And like I said, I know everybody's heard of it. Everybody's seen at least one version of the movie. I think there's multiple movies out on it. This is what is like if we made like a bingo card of our podcast, there's going to be like you talking about Canada, there's me mentioning Prince or Tom Petty, and then there's going to be all these little different things that we bring in here all the time. One of the things that I always mention is, like, I just like things that make me think of my childhood, and I like things that like, even if it's not the book itself that's talking or I can't relate to, I like that it brings me back to a time when I was reading that and how that kind of relates to my life. With the Swiss Family Robinson, for me, it was just such a comfort read. It's I would take for granted the fact that everybody probably knows what it is, but in case you didn't, a Swiss family basically gets shipwrecked and they live out their lives on an island, and there's all kinds of crazy animals, and it defies geography, and it defies most of what modern science would say is possible as far as the things that are on there. It does lean a little like a Christian, like Orthodox Christianity kind of thing. Like there's a lot of lessons in like morality and acceptance and family cooperation and close ties with your family and stuff. But I love it because that's the point I was initially trying to make. I used to always think that, or I used to hope that Pokemon were real when I was a kid. The other thing that I wish were real was Swiss Family Robinson. I loved the idea of this happening to my family. But my family, we're not big travelers, and my parents, we're not getting on boats is basically what I'm saying. We don't fly. Nothing. This is never going to happen. But it's such a innocent book. It's just an interesting book that touches on, natural history and animals and our interactions and physical science, and not very historically accurate. It's just, like I said, published in 1812. It was a really, really simple book at the time, but pure pleasure. I grappled with putting Harry Potter on this list at top 5. Mm-hmm. I should have mentioned the honorable mentions, but both of those two, I think, just from like a sheer number of times that I've read them, definitely like on the most read books of all time for me. So Swiss Family Robinson, a little long-winded, but that's my number 5.
A little while ago, both my boys went over to my parents, to their grandparents' place for a little vacation, and they spent some time with them, and then they came back, and my parents said to me, "Oh, here's a DVD for you to play on the way home," because we have like a DVD player that's in the back seat, right? They're like, yeah. Here's a DVD for them to watch. They've watched it 3 times already since they've been here, and they want to watch it again. And it was Swiss Family Robinson, and I was like that 1960 movie with Tommy Kirk and Kevin Corcoran. And they're like, yeah, that one. And so this old movie, but my sons love that too. So it's not the book, but the movie. So that's a good one.
Good.
Okay, my number 5. I'm going to go with The Grapes of Wrath, from John Steinbeck, obviously from 1939. This is an absolute American classic. The thing is, for me, there's several themes I would say that are present in American novels, but the one theme that I think is often overlooked is a theme that's explored in The Grapes of Wrath, and that's this. It's the fact that Americans are not very nice to each other. And no offense, Yancy, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's just, there's an unbelievable amount of parochialism and tribalism in the American culture. And in this book, there's prejudice and there's bias, but all the bias against the Okies. I find it's a fascinating motif to me, because on one hand, you've got, people saying Americans are Americans, they're my fellow Americans and all that jazz. But in reality, you treat everyone like shit. And this, I think Steinbeck drives this home at the end of the novel, because when the family come across the starving old man at the end, and you got the woman, Rosa Sharon, she just lost her baby, right? She has a stillborn baby. And what does she do? They find this starving old man to keep him from starving. These people are willing to help out their fellow American. So even when a large swath of the country doesn't care about them, which is powerful, powerful stuff, what does she do at the end of the book to the starving man? She nurses him to prevent him from starving. That's powerful.
Wow, I was not expecting that.
Powerful stuff. And to me, it's a theme that I think doesn't get talked about near enough. This idea of, the parochialism and tribalism, like I say, and it's an amazing novel to me. So it's number 5 on my list.
So another book that I should have given an honorable mention to, I think I mentioned it a couple podcasts ago, that I just read, East of Eden, obviously by the same author. Steinbeck is right. It's the first book of his that I had read, and then I promptly went out and purchased a whole bunch of his novels, and I just haven't got around to them yet, but it's definitely on my short list of fiction that I do want to read. I know. Unfortunately,
I just ruined the ending for you.
Yeah, I'm like, holy cow! You know what that kind of reminds me of, though, Chris? Have you ever read another book that actually was a recent movie that was very good? Have you ever read The Road?
No.
No. Have you seen the movie by chance?
No.
It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic type thing.
No, that sounds like it's right up your alley.
Yeah, a lot of the same themes are basically the world has completely gone to hell, and there's cannibalism, and there's all kinds of really, really dark things going on. Basically, in the entire world, there's almost no children whatsoever. They've all either been killed off or died or eaten, anything like that. It's a really, really dark premise, but same thing where this little boy, his dad dies, and he thinks that he's basically going to wander the earth for the next who knows how long, or until he's killed or whatever. And same act of kindness where another family that just happens to be passing by basically takes him in. They have nothing to gain from that. It's literally just another mouth to feed. But at some point, there's always that redemptive aspect of human beings where as long as we're alive, we still have souls, and given the opportunity, people will still ultimately, I think, choose to do the right thing. Sometimes it takes them a long time to get there, but it just made me think about that book, which is another good one. We could do honorable mentions all night, Chris. That could be literally the entire show of honorable mentions. But
so when you're number 4, what do you got?
My number 4, I'm going to do one that is a pretty esoteric pick. So it's called The Elegant Universe. It's by Brian Greene, and it was published in 1999. This basically is a physics book. It talks all about string and superstring theory. And this was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in nonfiction. It's had a new release that came out a few years ago. This is one of the I don't know, one of the most succinct, just perfectly articulated. I don't want to say easy to understand, because this isn't like the type of book that's a complete page burner. This basically is like your introductory course to everything as it relates to quantum theory and just relativity and all types of like really, really difficult theories about how gravity bends time and the dilemma of space and, like just all types of unification theories between, like I said, quantum theory. And it is a mind meld like you would not believe. I've probably read this book, I think, 4 times. And like I said, every single time I understand things a little bit better. And, I think it was Einstein that said this, or maybe it wasn't, who knows. He basically said that, like, if you cannot explain something in a very, very simple way, you do not understand it well enough, right? For me to try to explain, string theory and some of these like really, really deep and, super involved concepts and different aspects of physics and quantum theory is really, really difficult. And that's because I don't understand it like I should. And I'm not claiming to. For me, it's like it's purely I just want to learn about it. And the more I learn, it just it opens up a whole new world for me. Brian Greene has like this really, really uncanny ability to slowly introduce you one little piece, one little, something as simple as like giving a real world example to explain something that is really, really complex and took, decades and decades for the world's brightest scientists to explain. Something as simple as dropping a bowling ball on like a sheet that is being suspended, like if we're all sitting around in a circle, Chris, and we're holding a sheet and we drop a bowling ball in the middle, and as that bowling ball starts swirling around in a circle, and you can see how it just pulls down on the cloth, as it's pressing against this, you can basically think of like that cloth or that sheet as time. And so basically what it's saying is like, the larger mass that an object has, this bowling ball or, this mass is basically distorting or bending time. I know that sounds a little crazy and you're looking at me like, this is what he brought to the podcast. This is absolutely what I brought to the podcast.
Nice.
I'm not explaining it well, like I said, because I'm not claiming to understand it like these guys do. But for anybody who's ever even been remotely interested in string theory or multiple dimensions or the ultimate theory, the grand unifying theory of everything, or really just like to have like a more comprehensive understanding of how the universe works, this is a book where if you're patient with it, you give it everything. You're not distracted. You're not just reading to read it, but really engaging with it, stepping away, thinking about like what themes are going through, revisiting chapters. You can really learn a lot about how the universe really works. I haven't done a great job of explaining it, but just trust me. Like I said, if you want like an introductory book that through the end, like you'll actually have a very, very good grasp on string theory, this is the book for you. Whenever I gift books, this is the book oftentimes that I will give them. And oftentimes I get a lot of really weird looks. And I've even had one person return it to me. But incredible book, The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene. That's my number 4.
Well, you'll have to gift one to me. Maybe send it up here to Canada. My number 4 is a little bit more well-known, I guess you might say. And it's,
this book was a bestseller, okay?
Yeah, no,
it was
I know.
a
But I honestly, I had not heard of it until you mentioned it. So there's that. And this is also a fiction work, and I'm going way back to 1851, and that's Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And the book is a bit of an uphill climb, and I think a lot of the criticism of this book has always been that it's basically a long list of whale facts. Right? But it's not. It's so much more than that. If it wasn't for Moby Dick, I don't think we would have ever gotten Quint from Jaws. Okay? This book is iconic in every sense of the word. You think about it, the whale's bigger than life. The chase is bigger than life. The obsession is bigger than life. Moby Dick is awesome. I love this book. It kind of reads, it's funny because when you read it, it kind of almost reads like it's a difficult read. Like I say, it's an uphill climb. And I think the way that it's written is like kind of that almost sounds like old English, thou dost go forth looking for the whale and all this. Like, what the hell is this, right? But when you get through all that and you kind of push through it, like it tells a story in an incredible way. And like I say, the whole thing is just, it's iconic. It's just so iconic. And I remember reading it thinking, oh my God, this is good. And at the time, I convinced one of my good buddies, you got to read this book if you never read it. And then he read it. He goes, I didn't like it. It was dumb. And I'm like, okay, fine. But so I'm not the only one that likes this book. It's obviously a classic for a reason, but I think it's just absolutely iconic. And I really, really like this book a lot. So it's number 4 on my list.
You know what? This is another one of the books where one thing I'll always give my parents credit for is, some of my siblings like to read, some of them did not, and that's totally cool. And I'm not gonna like shame them or anything like that. To each his own. They all had like amazing talents and were really good at other things. My whole family, is musical and artistic and just really good at a lot of different things. My thing was reading, and my mom and dad, like if we had an parents fully pushed us, and like they really made sure that like we had the tools that we needed to be whatever we wanted to be. And so like one thing my mom did was she bought a bunch of these classics, and they were like the illustrated classics.
Oh, nice.
So whenever I was a little kid, like, this was like my introduction to reading for pleasure. Was I had the Swiss Family Robinson, and I had 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and like, obviously I had Moby Dick, and I thought it was awesome. And then once you read the original version by Herman Melville, like you realize like, wow, there's actually a lot more to this book than. And when you talk about like a thematic standpoint, like when I first, obviously I read Moby Dick first, and then I read The Great Gatsby in high school. I had to as a requirement. Right. And I instantly thought, I'm like, wow, I'm like, in a lot of ways, they are kind of the same book. Just as far as like the longing, the yearning, like that, almost like that unattainable prize. You know what I mean? There's like, just from a thematic standpoint, I know, and there's many books that have that same kind of thing where like somebody wants something really bad, they're going for it. But those two books, it's interesting that you had mentioned both of those tonight. Like they both kind of like made me think of each other. So Moby Dick is awesome though. And like you said, like how many like under deep under the sea, like mysterious monster books and movies and other forms of pop culture has it inspired? Like that was the OG. Like I love that you said that, like there literally would be no Jaws if not for Moby Dick. Like that is like the trendsetter for sure. Nope. What number are we on? 3?
Number three. Take it away.
Okay, so number 3 for me, Jared Diamond. This is also nonfiction, and it actually won the Pulitzer in, what year was it? I think 1997 or 1998. It's called Guns, Germs, and Steel: The Fates of Human Societies. Again, this is the type of book where it's not going to be a page burner. This one's a little bit thicker, several hundred pages. It is lots of footnotes, this is a scholarly work. This is somebody who worked as a professor at the University of California in Los Angeles, or I could have just said UCLA. He's a tenured professor who has basically devoted his entire life to studying history and studying humanity. He's an archaeologist, and there's just a lot of things that this guy knows about. And those are the types of people where when I really genuinely want to learn something, I trust academics. And I know today in our political climate, Chris, not just in my country, but in yours as well, and worldwide, actually, like there's oftentimes a demonization of people who might actually be in the know just because they have conflicting viewpoints from you. Anytime that happens, I always try to side with the people who have devoted their life to a particular field, because I feel like they have a much larger investment. They have more, and I just trust that I know where they're coming from. What makes this book so fantastic, it is like a history of the world kind of book. It starts out super like the advent of humankind, and what is this book's main calling card is it basically tries to tell us why countries in Europe and Asia are so much more advanced, or at one point were so much more advanced than many of the societies that we saw in Africa. So obviously during World War II, and even before that, there's always been rampant racism, and there's been like the eugenics movement, which set like equal human rights and conception of all of us as being like brothers and sisters, and all of us being equal and created in God's image. It set that back 100, 200 years, right? The eugenics movement. What this book basically challenges is the fact that it gives actual scientific reasoning for why was it that whenever Europeans first came into Africa and like the sub-Saharan regions of the world, why was it that these people were still so far behind as far as civilization and agriculture and all these things? And basically, like, it breaks down the facts that like environmental differences, things that were it's to grow crops there, because it's so much more difficult to acquire food and you're constantly being nomadic. You can't establish societies. You can't build churches. You can't possibly produce enough food to where you can support people who are scholars, people who just study, or people who, learn things. And, because of that, you can't really facilitate commerce. You can't have trade between different cultures. Like, it was solely because of their environment. And, this is cradle of civilization. This is where human beings started out. Those human beings that stayed there in this really, really particular climate really, really struggled just to survive. And obviously, Chris, if away all of the comforts that you and I have in a Western society today, take away our air conditioning, take away our agriculture, take away all those things, and you drop us in the middle of a desert with 1,000 other people, we are going to struggle for a very, very long time. Like most of the books I've talked about tonight, this is a very long-winded explanation, but basically what this book does is it challenges everybody's notions that one type of race or one type of people or one country or one group of people is inherently smarter, or they have more intellectual capability, or they're more moral, or they have some sort of genetic superiority to other people. This basically challenges all of that in such a scientific and proven way. It really changed how I think about the world. I can't say that enough. This sounds like I'm being hyperbolic, but this is like one of those most eye-opening books where I would get through a chapter and I'd be like, oh my God, like that this is literally forcing me to reconcile the fact that I was harboring these thoughts in my head about this particular type of people or this person, whenever in fact they weren't true at all. And really, really eye-opening. I can't recommend this enough. I mentioned, I've mentioned books in the past like The Elegant Universe. This is a book that I would love to gift somebody. I actually even have an extra copy of it. I'm just waiting for somebody to ask for it or for the opportunity to come up. But this is one of those books where if you genuinely want to learn, if you want to The Elegant Universe was about the universe, right? The origins of the universe and how all that stuff came to be, as far as just everyday understanding of physics, whether you think that's creationism or you think that's just pure science. There's a place for both. And I personally think, God is a scientist in every sense of the word, but this literally tells the state and the history of human beings and societies and everything. And once again, running super long, but it is a fantastic book by Jared Diamond. Please read it. That's my number 3, Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Oh, there you go. So as I mentioned, I went back and read all these quote unquote classics, and a lot of them are showing up in my top 5 just because some of them are so good. And I'm like, where was this book my whole life? And so one that I never ever read as a kid, or even as a young adult, I never read, and it wasn't until I challenged myself, finds its way onto number 3 on my list, and that's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I know I'm going way back because it was published in 1831, but Victor Hugo's novel, my God, it's so good. This is how you write a book, man. This is telling an incredible story. And again, I'm all about that. I really enjoy those themes, as I mentioned with The Grapes of Wrath. And the theme that is just so prevalent in The Hunchback of Notre Dame is just how cruel people can be. People are friggin' cruel. And it doesn't matter when it was. I say, this was published in 1831, but it actually takes place back in the 1400s, right? That's what it's set. Mm-hmm. And people are just so cruel. They're right from the get-go of this novel, they're cruel to the Hunchback by, making fun of him during the Fool's Day ceremony that they have. And then what goes on with Esmeralda, and then the he can't have her, and then he gets upset that Phoebus can't have her, and Frollo, so they get jealous, and they have her hung. And the scene when Esmeralda is hiding in the wall, and the guards are coming through, and they're ripping away the bricks brick by brick, and her mother is screaming. I couldn't believe reading it. It was just so vivid and so real and so visceral. It is so good. And then the other thing too is there's a whole chapter in the book about Paris. The whole chapter just describes Paris, from one end of the city to the other. It talks about the whole thing. And I remember reading it at the time and thinking, why is this whole chapter describing Paris, back in the 1400s? What the heck is this? And then I realize Paris is a character in this book too. It's a very, very strong and omnipresent character in the book as well. Oh my God, this book is so good. And then I think in 96, there's been all kinds of adaptations, of this novel into, movies and stuff like that over the years. And in 96, Disney went ahead and said, oh, we're going to make an animated movie of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Why would you do it? Why would you make this movie into a Disney cartoon? It is, the themes are not, something that I think, kids need to be aware of at this point. The whole thing, it just seems like a mismatch there. So that one was not good, but the book itself, oh my God, it's so good. And then just the idea of love. And then at the end of the book, they hang Esmeralda, and the Hunchback goes and throws Frollo off the top of the Notre Dame. And then he goes down to where she's buried, and he lays there with her, and he dies of starvation because he wants to be with her. Like the whole thing is just so, oh my God. That's how you write a book right there. Hunchback of Notre Dame, my number 3. Love that book. Man, it's good.
So I think we're on my number 1. I think we messed up the number somewhere.
Number 2. On to number 2.
Because I talked about Swiss Family Robinson.
Yep.
I talked about The Alchemist.
Okay.
I talked about Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Okay.
And I talked about The Elegant Universe, right? So that's 4. So I'm on number 1 now, right?
I guess so. I talked about, what did I talk about? The Grapes of Wrath, Moby Dick, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So I only did 3. So
I don't know how we did this.
I don't know. So how about if I'll do my number 2 and then we'll move on to our number 1? How's that sound?
Let's do this. I don't know how we did that. I think that's the first. But
I don't know. It's all good. My number 2, I'm going way, 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 way back in time, all the way back to 1818, and that's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This book is so good. It's not written like any other book because it's written in the form of letters. So it's like letters that are written. It's this person's letter to this person, and that's how the story unfolds. It was originally done as a bet. Like Mary Shelley got together with a couple of other authors, and they had a bet who could write the scariest novel, and I think she won with Frankenstein. And the thing with Frankenstein that I like so much is like it's just so iconic. Obviously, like it's stood the test of time. But here's the thing: when and Frankenstein, by the way, was one of the books that was on my list that I had to go and read. Like I'd never read it, and so I thought going into the book, and I thought, what do I know about Frankenstein? Okay, let me think about this. Okay, well, there's a monster that's put together from corpses that are all sewn together, and it's got like lightning bolts in its neck, and then they use lightning to make it come to life. And then there's the scene with where he goes and he's like cruel to people and kills people, and like all the townspeople have like torches and go out. None of that's in the book. None of it. And in fact, when you read the book, they never mention once that he's actually the Dr. Frankenstein makes his creature from dead bodies. Never mentions it. Doesn't mention what he's making. He's making a creature. And so you're like, wow, this is, where do they get this idea of digging up dead bodies and taking parts and putting them together? Doesn't happen in this book. And in fact, I always think of Frankenstein's monster as being like this, mindless killer, right? And in the book, it's not. It's a wonderfully gentle creature that likes to go out, and it likes flowers, and it likes nature, and it befriends a young girl, and it's the creature's nice. Like unlike some of the other books I've mentioned where everyone's cruel, and this book certainly has cruelty in it as well, but not from the monster. The monster's nice. All the monster wants is then he realizes that he's lonely and he wants to have a companion. So I mean,
isn't that so? That's so soul crushing.
I know,
like he's so pure in that sense,
and everybody thinks that it's a monster and he has to die, and because it's because I remember he goes and hides, the monster hides by a cabin and looks into the cabin and sees people, and then understands how they interact and understands how people are social with each other, and what love is all about and what family is all about. That's what this book is about. And think of it as this awful horror story about this monster killing people. Not at all. Oh, this book is so good. So Frankenstein's my number 2. So now we can move on to your number 1.
Okay, so again, my apologies. I don't know how we did that. I think I just did 2 books in a row.
That's all good.
So number 1 for me is a little bit of an esoteric pick. I think it actually won the Pulitzer Prize back in 2008 or 2009. The book, I think it was 2009. The book came out in January 1st of 2009. Long story short, the author, Paul Harding, could not find anybody to pick up this book. Nobody wanted to publish it. It took him almost 10 years to write, and it basically sat unprinted, unpublished in his office, desk drawer for years, he said, before anybody would actually pick it up. It ended up being published by the Bellevue Literary Review. It is a nonprofit, which is like an extension of, I think, like NYU, like one of their medical departments or something. Basically had like a literary press, and it was nonprofit. It was basically just to publish books that they thought would like be for the social good. So it had like a really, really interesting pathway to actually getting in front of people and people reading it. The book is called Tinkers. Tinkers is basically about a character. His name is George Washington Crosby. And he is basically on his deathbed. He's an old man who his whole life he's been a clock repairman. And all throughout his home, he has just dozens and dozens of clocks hanging everywhere. As he's dying, he's basically going in and out of consciousness, and he is having hallucinations and remembering things that had happened in his past, especially things that happened with him and his family and his dad. What makes this book so powerful and so beautiful is because it took this author so long to write it. Like I said, almost a decade of actual writing. The prose in this is just absolutely fantastic. It is less than 200 pages. It is a very, very short read, but this is one of those books where it is so emotionally jarring, and the pictures that he creates with this are so powerful that you stop a lot. You have to stop a lot and just kind of think about things. This is a man, like I said, who is on the brink of dying, and he is looking back and thinking about all these different things. One of the most powerful scenes in the entire book is as he's drifting in and out of consciousness, he basically imagines that the roof is falling in on him as he's laying there on his deathbed. Through the roof is all these different things, like these little mementos and figure pieces of knickknacks of things that have happened in his life, and they start summoning up all these memories. And one of the most powerful scenes after that is he imagines whenever he was a child, his father had epilepsy, and he always kind of struggled with identifying with his father, with being close with him. There was one point where his father was having an epileptic attack, a seizure, and he was, throbbing around on the ground like really violently. And his mom asked him to shove a towel so that he wouldn't bite his tongue. And whenever he did that, his father bit his hand really, really badly and basically drew blood on him. And the boy runs away. He runs away, and all kinds of things happen where like he's never able to reconcile the relationship between his father. He struggles with connecting with his adult children. He struggles with all these different things. This is basically like this is kind of like I'm trying to think of like a book that this would be familiar to, but it is a beautifully, just painfully emotional book about time and like how it plays on all these different metaphors with clocks and the ticking of time and the passing of time, and how clocks keep stopping and then going, and he asks people to wind them up for him, and basically him trying to find meaning in a life where he felt that his life lacked meaning, and wondering if really he had done anything or contributed anything. It's really, like I said, it's a powerful book. It's really difficult to read, but man, is it a beautiful book, and the payoff at the end is so beautiful. It is one of the most powerful books. Every time I mention it to people, like I said, it did win a Pulitzer, but an interesting backstory to this book. The original print, like I said, was less than 3,500 copies, and the author himself basically sold most of them like through word of mouth, or he would give them to relatives and they would sell them for him. Nobody wanted to publish this book. Whenever it was initially named as a finalist for the Pulitzer, he actually did a speech a couple of years ago where he talked about basically any book can be nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. All it takes is you have to send 3 physical copies. I think it's Cambridge University that actually hosts the event and the prizes and stuff. You send 3 copies of the book plus $50, and you can be up for it. And this was the biggest upset. The New York Times didn't even review it. It was never a bestseller. This was one of the craziest underdog stories when it came to fiction, actually, like a book winning the Pulitzer Prize. And like I said, the writing, the fact that this guy was so meticulous with it, and this was, I should have mentioned this at the top, a novel, Chris. This was the first time that this author had ever written a book and published it, and it became basically like an known underground classic that was lauded in history as like a Pulitzer Prize winner. It's a beautiful book. Like I said, the prose is amazing. It's not overly technical like The Elegant Universe or Guns, Germs, and Steel. It is just pure fiction, but it's absolutely beautiful. Everything about it is believable, and it's just a beautiful story about family and memories and time, and it's just great. It's probably my favorite book of all time. I've read it a few times. Could definitely read it again. If you dedicate a few hours in one day, you can go through it, and I promise you won't be disappointed. It's absolutely amazing.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear that that's your favorite book of all time, as you mentioned, because that's why it's your number one. My number one is also my favorite book of all time, and much like yours, it also won a Pulitzer Prize, but mine was back in 1960. This is the only book, and this is one of the criteria that I wanted to use for this show. So my number one book had to be something that was special, and this one certainly is. And this is the only book that I've ever read in my entire life that when I got to the end, when I finished the last word of the book, my first gut instinct was I wanted to go back to the beginning and start reading it over again. That was I've never had that feeling before at the end of a book ever.
That's powerful.
I got done. I was like, I just want to go back and start reading it all over because I can't leave this world. It was just so engrossing. And that's To Kill a Mockingbird. And I know that a lot of people are like, oh man, I had to read that when I was a kid. What's that? My God, is that a good book? It has again, the themes that I mentioned earlier are there again in terms of cruelty and the racism that's with Tom Robinson, and you realize like it was Mayella that came onto him. He didn't even do anything wrong, and he automatically is just, you know, arrested and thrown in jail and found guilty even though he's totally innocent. And the characters of this book are just so unbelievably great. Atticus Finch, you want a hero. If you want your kids to read a book and you want them to gravitate toward a hero, have them read this book, and Atticus Finch is a hero. Okay, this is unbelievably powerful. You know, just in terms of his character, you know, the fact that he's like, and I don't think they ever explain in the book, I'm trying to remember why he's a single parent. I don't really know why, but he's a single parent, but he stands up for what's right, for what he believes in. And he does it very silent, very quietly. He does everything by his actions, you know, by the way he handles himself, by the way he does. And that's how he, you know, imparts this onto his children. And even the children, Jem and Scout, are so good. And, you know, I'm pretty sure that the book, when Harper Lee wrote it, it's kind of based on her life, right? So she's kind of like Scout. Like, I've even heard that the character of Dill is basically Truman Capote, who she was friends with as a child. It's everything about the book from like I say, the trial, which most people remember the most about the book, but all the way down to the character of Boo Radley and how he's there to kind of protect her as well. This book is phenomenal. Like, it is phenomenal. And again, going back to the theme that I mentioned earlier about people being cruel to each other, but at the heart of it all, you know, there's this unwavering sort of devotion to justice, that there's justice. Somewhere there has to be justice. And all those themes are all wrapped together. To me, it was just the most engrossing book I ever read in my entire life. And again, it was another one that was on that list. I never read it when I was a kid. Never read it when I was a teenager. I read it when I was an adult, when I put together my list, and I'm so glad I did, because it shot right to the top. It's my favorite book of all time. So, you know,
I did read it in high school, Chris, and, you know, I know obviously it's a movie, and I've never watched the movie just because the movie's
good. I mean, Gregory Peck is outstanding as Atticus Finch, but even the actress, and it escapes me now her name, because I don't think she did anything else. The girl that played Scout in it, she was great. But Robert Duvall played Boo Radley. So, I mean, there's, you know, some great actors in it, but even the actor that played Tom Robinson in the movie was so good. Oh my God. He just had the emotion. Oh, the whole thing is so good. Yeah. I would recommend watching the movie if you can. But the book, so you read it as a kid?
I read it I read it in high school. And it was
what was your takeaway? What was your takeaway from it when you read it?
I thought it was amazing. And like you were talking about, as soon as the book ended, I go through this thing with really, really good books. Like I get really, really invested in them. They become super important to me. And the more I get into a book, like I literally shut every other part of my life out. Maybe that's escapism. Maybe that's a character flaw of mine. But like I really become engrossed in these books. And, you know, that was a perfect example of it, where I was it was such a ride emotionally that, like I said, knowing that there was a movie out, I was so afraid of having that experience be ruined for me that I've kind of always stayed away from the movie. We talked about in a past episode, like I talked about The Matrix, you know, there's another square on like our bingo card of Pop Goes Your World, me talking about The Matrix. I hated that the sequels came out because I was so excited about them. I waited so long for them, and they really took a lot away from the original. You know what I mean? So like I'm always kind of scared of when people revisit things or add on to sequels or prequels or whatever, whenever it is so perfect. Because I mean, that literally is just it's such a classic, Chris. It's one of the best novels of all time. And man, one other thing I want to say before we wrap up this discussion is. Like I'll say this: you were talking about how as soon as you finished reading the book, you wanted to go back and immediately start reading it again.
Right back to page one. Yep.
Yep, I get like that too. And also, I'm curious if you have the same experience too, where, especially like the 30 minutes, the hour immediately after I read it, there's almost like this kind of mourning that goes
because you're not in that world anymore. Yeah.
You're not in that world anymore, but also like you'll know that you can never experience that book in the same sense again.
No,
you know what I mean? You've been exposed to what happens to it, and it's really kind of sad. And I'm not saying like don't read books because like they're going to break your heart. You know, it's going to rip your heart out knowing that you can't experience that again. But it's just it really is amazing to me. Just what a good book can do, and like how it can actually change your life. And you know, some of the books I've mentioned have done that for me, where as soon as I finish reading it, I realize that like, hey, you know, this sounds incredibly cliche and just very, very corny, but like I'll literally think like I'm a different person now, Chris. I think differently. I know a little bit more about the world, and I'm more susceptible to being empathetic or seeing how other people think or how a different side of people are, or you know what I mean, just learning more about people. And I think that's probably my single favorite thing about reading. I'm entertained when I read, but I also don't read for entertainment. I read because I want to learn. And I think the best books do that. They can trick you into learning, or they can just be upfront about like, hey, you're going to learn something, but in reality they're actually really, really entertaining too. I don't know how to wrap that up, but I don't know if you have any other closing thoughts.
I would say two things. I would say number one, that literature is just the most unbelievable art form that there is. And going back to my choice of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, my number 3 pick, they bring up an interesting theme in that book, too, that I think is worth just mentioning here. And they talk about architecture. And in that book, they're talking about how architecture used to be the great art form. Because before they had a printing press, how did you express art? Well, you did it through architecture. And that's how you left your mark on the world, was through great architecture. But now with the advent of the printing press, now people can do it through literature. And so it changed from architecture to literature to be man's greatest vehicle, for artistic expression. And I agree with it. Like, I mean, there's nothing like a book. And it's interesting too. That's why, like, you always hear movies are never as good as the book. The movie's never as good as the book, because I think when you read a book, you picture certain things a certain way. When I read, Harper Lee's, To Kill a Mockingbird, I picture the house looks a certain way, and the characters look a certain way. And then when you see the movie, it's like, well, that's the director's vision of what he saw in the book, and that's not mine, so there's always that disconnect. But I think it's probably an interesting thing, maybe on a future show, for us to have a topic of where we think, because there's got to be examples where movies were better than the book. I can think of a couple off the top of my head, but we'll have to visit that at some point. What do you think?
Yeah, last point, just to touch on that. My biggest pet peeve ever is whenever people talk about movies versus books and they say, oh, well, the book was better. I'm sorry, but of course it was better, because there's no production budget. There is no limitation on a person's imagination, right?
Right.
The only thing holding you back is your want and your knowledge and your, how much time you put into it, how creative you are. There is no financial limitation or time constraint on a book versus a movie. That is the dumbest argument, and I hate to like close this out on like a negative note, but like, oh my God, nothing irks me more than when people say that. Of course the book is going to be better. You know what I mean? Of course. The original piece of art, of course, the adaptation that is a smaller, lesser version and less creative version of that piece of art, that rendition is not going to be better. Please stop saying that. Please. That's it. I'm done.
I don't know, but I do think that we could possibly explore the idea of of movies that are better than the book version of themselves. I think we could do that at a future show. And the one thing that I'll leave you, want to leave it on more of a positive note. And this is a millennial quote, and it's from George R.R. Martin, right? Who wrote A Song of Fire and Ice, which is Game of Thrones. He, we were talking about fiction versus nonfiction. He has such a great quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, he says, like, a man who reads leads 1,000 lives. A man who doesn't read leads one. And it's just such I don't know. Fiction is just, it's where it's at. I didn't have any nonfiction books, like I said, on mine. But anyway, time now to move on, because we are now going to have some
fun with Yancy.
Okay, Yancy, so since we're talking about great books and stuff, what I thought I would do is, because, we like all kinds of different pop culture, movies, books, the whole thing. And, movies are like probably our favorite thing ever. So I tell you what I'm going to do. Very, very simple game I'm going to play with you tonight. It's 50-50, okay? It's easy.
Okay.
You're going to get them all. I'm going to name a movie, and all you got to do is tell me if it was based on a book or not. That's it. I name a movie, you tell me it's based on a book. Like I say Jaws, you say, yeah, it's based on a book by Peter Benchley, right? That's it.
Okay.
So you can handle this, right?
This seems simple enough, but as the listeners can attest to, this is not going to go well for me.
No, never. So it's really simple. Okay, so I'm going to give you a movie. Just tell me yes or no if it's based on a book. 50-50, okay? So 1980s, The Shining. Was The Shining based on a book, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it was. It was based on Stephen King's 1977 novel. Very good. Okay, another easy one for you. One of your favorite movies of all time, 1993's Jurassic Park? Was Jurassic Park based on a book? Yes or no?
I just finished a Michael Crichton book, and it is definitely based on a book.
Yes, it was. Okay. Sticking with the 90s, we'll go to 94. Pulp Fiction. Was Pulp Fiction based on a book? Yes or no?
The title would lead me to believe that it is. However, I'm going to say that it was not.
You are correct, Yancy. It was an original screenplay by Tarantino and Roger Avary.
Tarantino himself, yeah.
There you go. Okay, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from 2005. Was it based on a book? Yes or no?
Definitely based on a series of books, which I have read, so yes.
Yes, it was based on C.S. Lewis's 1950 book. Very good. Okay, 1996's Fargo. Was Fargo based on a book or not?
Oh, this could really go both ways. I'm going to say no.
Yeah, you are correct. It was based on original screenplay by the Coen brothers. Very good. Okay, now I'm going back to 1939. The Wizard of Oz, Yancy. Was The Wizard of Oz based on a book? Yes or no?
I'm going to say yes.
Yes, it was. L. Frank Baum's 1900 book. Okay, you got to stay with the same year, 1939, to make it tough on you. Gone with the Wind. Was Gone with the Wind based on a book? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it was. Margaret Mitchell's 1936 novel. Okay, I'm going to come into the millennial generation for you. I'm going to go all the way to 2004's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Based on a book? Yes or no?
I've even talked about this book as being like one of my favorites. I'm going to say no.
You are correct. It was written for the screen by Charlie Kaufman. Congratulations. The Princess Bride from 1987. We've covered that topic on the podcast before. Was The Princess Bride based on a book? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it was based on William Goldman's 1973 novel. Congratulations. 1974. Roman Polanski film Chinatown. Was Chinatown based on a book? Yes or no?
Yes.
No, it was not. It was a screenplay by Robert Towne.
Yes.
Yes, you did sweep. Oh, that's so good. Okay, we mentioned earlier Steven Spielberg's 1975 masterpiece, Jaws, was based on the Peter Benchley novel. But what about its sequel, Yancy? Jaws 2. Was Jaws 2 based on a book or not?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, you are correct. It was a screenplay by Carl Gottlieb and Howard Sackler. And finally, 1988, Die Hard. Was Die Hard based on a book? Yes or no?
1988, the year I was born, Year of the Dragon. Man, I don't know, Chris. I'm going to say yes.
Yes, it was based on 1979's Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe. Congratulations. You got them all right except one. Very good. This is like huge for you. This is like, you never do this well on Fun with Yancy. So that one, see, it was a 50-50. I told you, finally, after 80 episodes, I always say it's going to be easy this week. And you're like, yeah, whatever. And then,
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
And now this week it was. So you got that going for you. I also wanted to mention that I think on the next show, we've gotten some feedback, over the years that we've been doing this podcast. We've gotten some consistent feedback. And that feedback is that because I'm a Gen Xer and I'm an older Gen Xer, right? So I love like 70s and 80s stuff. And because you're a millennial and you like sort of 2000 on, the one area that kind of gets lost in the mix is the 90s. We tend to miss the 90s. We both experienced it, and we both have lots of things that we love about the 90s, but it tends to get kind of like lost in the shuffle. So some of the feedback that we get sometimes is that we need to focus on the 90s some more. So what I decided to do was I thought I would invite our good friend Caveman himself, Derek Myers, to come back on the show. He's going to come back on the next show with us, Yancy, and we're going to focus on the 90s. Okay, we'll talk about this when we get off the air, whether or not we're going to do like 90s movies or 90s TV shows or 90s music, probably movies, knowing Caveman, but we'll pick one of those kind of topics and we'll come back and we'll just have a free for all discussion about all the things that we love about, 90s, whatever the topic is. So what do you think about that? Obviously you agree with the feedback. I mean, we do kind of neglect the 90s, don't you think?
Definitely the earlier part of the 90s. Like I talk about 99 and then the early aughts a lot, but yeah, like, 90 to 96, 97 it's kind of like a huge blind spot on both of our parts. I mean, I think it has something to do with the fact that like I was like 5 years old, but
Right.
you know what I mean? But like I definitely think like there's a lot of dramatic and troublesome pop culture that came out of the early 90s. I'm not going to lie. A lot of that stuff did not age particularly well, but then again, we could say that about a lot of stuff in the 80s and the 70s too. So I think it'll be fun to kind of,
No.
I think it'd be fun to revisit it and just kind of, I don't know, see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be good. So we'll have Caveman come on and join us. Like I say, we'll talk all about the 90s. Like I say, we'll pick a topic in there, 90s movies or something like that, and we'll talk about that. If you want to reach us on Twitter, you can always find us at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. And you can always go over to popgoesyourworld.com. All of our information is there. Yancy, it's always great to get back in the studio here and talk to you. We take sometimes too much time between shows, but I really love getting together with you. It's always a lot of fun. And
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You know, on behalf of Yancy, this is Chris McBrien saying thank you for taking the time to listen to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.